Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we're joined by Bob Thomas, an NFL record-setting kicker turned Illinois Supreme Court Justice. Bob spent over a decade in the NFL, including 10 seasons with the Chicago Bears, where he became one of the Bears' all-time leading scorers. After football, Bob's journey took an unexpected turn. He pursued law, eventually serving as a justice on the Illinois Supreme Court and even becoming Chief Justice. In this episode, Bob shares what it was like playing for Mike Ditka and alongside Walter Payton, whose impact went far beyond the game. Bob also shares an extremely personal story about Walter Payton, one that gave him a whole new understanding of what it means to be a servant leader. Bob also opens up about leading under pressure, making tough calls, and how faith shaped his leadership, on the field and in the courtroom. If you've ever faced setbacks, tough choices, or moments that tested your character, Bob's story will challenge you to lead with integrity under pressure.
Bob, thank you for joining us on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
Chris, it's fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is amazing to sit in the presence of greatness.
Oh, man. Yeah. My wife says your honor, take out the garbage, so it's not a big deal.
It's not every day that you get to sit next to somebody who's a top 5 all-time scoring leader for an NFL team. That's an amazing stat. And your journey from being on the Bears to being a judge on the Illinois Supreme Court is amazing. How did you end up on the Bears?
Yeah, that's a good story. I went to school in Rochester, New York, grew up in Rochester, kicked a long field goal in high school. I was a soccer player, basically. My dad was a professional soccer player, came from Italy, born in Paris, went to school in Italy. So I learned to kick and after I played soccer and got to kick on my high school team. And that was in the day, Chris, when, now there's soccer teams on every corner, and kids are learning how to kick footballs that may never have played soccer. But at that time, the few place kickers in the NFL were even soccer-style kickers. So I was in that second wave of soccer-style kickers, and I kicked a long field goal in high school. Got a letter from Ara Parsegan, shifted gears. I was a walk-on at Notre Dame. My parents, I was in a blue-collar family. My parents really didn't have the money, but they said, we'll send you there and see what happens. You couldn't play football varsity football as a freshman. There were 3 freshman games. So I went there as a freshman, and sophomore year I became the starting kicker. Kicked the winning field goal in the Sugar Bowl in 1973 against Alabama. Probably my worst kick I ever hit, but it went through, thank God. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this podcast. Drafted by the Rams, made it to the last cut. They re-signed me at the end, right at the end of their season, and there was a little known rule that if a team signs you and cuts you and re-signs you, you have to go through something called procedural waivers, where every other team in the league gets a chance to pick you up. So when the Rams re-signed me, I went through procedural waivers, and the Redskins, now the Commanders, the Redskins and the Bears both picked me up. The Bears were lower in the standings. Some things never change. And since they were lower in the standings, I got awarded to the Bears and played 10 years with the Bears.
Wow.
That's the long way of getting there, longhand fashion, but yeah, that's what happened.
You had an amazing career. Most NFL players only play for a few years, and you played a very long career. What was it like just playing with such amazing people and also becoming such a powerful leader in the locker room yourself?
Boy, to come in with Walter Payton was really terrific. And to play, you talk about greatness. I mean, I think he was the best football player ever to put on a uniform. He could block, tackle, certainly run and catch. And he actually, a few people know this, but he punted and also place kicked. I was glad he chose not to be the place kicker for the team, too. So, yeah, playing with guys like that. The neat thing, we didn't make the money, obviously, that they make now. But the players were together for years, right? I mean, typically a few rookies would make the team, but I played with guys for 8-10 years. And now with free agency the way it is, I mean, it changes. It changes for the fans, but it also changes for the team, right? You're with different teammates basically every year. So we talk about how we made less money, but we had more fun.
We talk a lot on this podcast about servant leadership, and you mentioned guys like Walter Payton. I know you've played for Mike Ditka, or with Mike. Like, what was it like being around those guys?
Yeah, as I said before, I missed out on a Super Bowl, and that's a story. I was in San Diego in 1985, played with the Chargers. 85 obviously was the year the Bears went to the Super Bowl. Speaking of servant leadership, I remember getting cut. I had my best year in 1984, and Ditka called me up, and I was released, and he told me it wasn't fair. They had drafted Kevin Butler in the 4th round. So it was a fait accompli that he was probably going to be the kicker. I played 10 years. He was a great kicker. They had another guy who came and played for another 10 years. And after I was cut, I went down in the locker room. I waited upstairs in the office area until I knew my teammates would be in meetings at 9 o'clock. And so I waited till about 9:15 because I was a little broken up, but I wanted to get back to the locker room to get my shoes and different personal belongings. I thought I'd play again, which I did in San Diego in 85. And I go to my locker, and lockers in the NFL aren't like lockers in the local high school. They're big enough to sit in. And that's exactly what Walter Payton was doing. He was sitting in my locker. I guess I wasn't smart enough to realize that if Walter was late for a meeting, they might still play him on Sunday. And I remember it, Chris, like it was yesterday. He dragged me outside, grabbed me by my hand, dragged me outside the equipment room door. We sat on railroad ties. And to me, as I already indicated, the greatest football player of all time buried my tear-soaked eyes in his chest and told me what it meant for him to have the opportunity to play with me, a broken-down kicker, for 10 years. And, that I missed out on a Super Bowl, but I didn't miss out on that moment. And to me, there's a perfect example of, servant leadership, right? I mean, Walter stopped thinking about himself, thought about me, and made a terrific impact in my life.
Wow. I think it's really interesting because a story like that, you always think through different athlete stories, and you walk out onto the field and there's thousands of fans cheering. It's easy probably to get a big head. How did you deal with that and stay humble at the same time, knowing that so many people are cheering your name? And how do you think other guys dealt with that?
That's a really good question. Being a kicker was probably a little easier to be grounded because they threw you up in the air when you made a kick, and literally Ditka actually grabbed my face mask after missing a kick and started jacking my head up and down by pulling on the face mask. So you learn to live a little bit more in the moment and try to realize that, kicks are mutually exclusive, and you didn't just become a bad kicker when you missed or a great kicker when you made one. I think my faith helped me with that. I didn't really... I didn't find my worth to be based on whether I had a great game on Sunday or a poor game on Sunday. It became, because I was a child of God and He loved me, and thinking about His sovereignty and His sovereign plan helped. I think people, I'm sure I've heard before that people think it's kind of trite when these guys get interviewed after making a putt or winning a football game and winning a division and, giving glory to God. But when I became the Bears' leading scorer, which I was at one time, that's what's painted on the game ball, to God be the glory. So really faith becomes an important part in someone's life, and the rest kind of sloughs off. Not that you don't care, not that you aren't hurt or affected when you don't do your best, but still, that God has a plan for your life.
That's so good. What were some of or at least one of your favorite moments being in the NFL? It's every kid's dream. I've got a couple kids and they talk about being in the NFL constantly. You hear that. When you think through it, what were the highlights that first come to mind? Well,
the biggest highlight with the Bears, and I don't know if it still is, but it was one of the 25 greatest moments in Bear history when they compiled all this, was in 1977. We played the the Giants in what they called an ice bowl. I know that the Green Bay Packers Super Bowl was an ice bowl, but they called this an ice bowl. And the announcers were indicating that it was the worst field conditions they ever saw. I mean, it literally was a sheet of ice on the field, and at certain portions of the field, you would stick through the ice and there'd be freezing water underneath it. It was really a mess. And I, thank the good Lord, I kicked a field goal in sudden death overtime. We needed to win the game to go to the playoffs for the first time in 14 years. And the kick goes through the uprights, and a couple of the rest of the story type of moments were, we're in New York, we're playing in New York, and my parents were at the game. And I had missed a couple of field goals earlier. I think I ended up 2 for 4 in the day. It was hard to stand up. On that last kick, Roland Harper and Walter Payton were making snow angels to try to get a spot where I wouldn't slip. And my mom, it was freezing for one reason, but she couldn't watch anymore as we were going down the field. And she went into the ladies' room, and this lady comes running in. We won. So my mom figured, well, we're in New York. It's probably New York won. And it was Jack Pardee's wife, the coach's wife. So that happened. And then Bob Avellini was the quarterback, and he lived in New York. And he said, why don't our parents and us go to have dinner, and why don't you stay here tonight, and we'll just go back the next day or 2 days later back to Chicago. So we did that, but it wasn't in the day of car phones, so we got lost. And lost Avellini, had no idea where we were, so I asked my parents if I could go to the airport and go back because the team was going to have a celebration back in Chicago. So they took me to the airport. I got a ticket, and I was sitting in coach, and I still remember Brent Musburger, the announcer, was in first class. He came back to sit with me to talk about the game. We get to Chicago, there's 7,000 fans at O'Hare, and my commercial flight had beat the team plane back. And all these people are waiting for the team to get off the plane. So now I said, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to meet my teammates at the gate as they get off the plane, right? And it had just made that kick. So I'm trying to make my way to the gate. And of course, because of the crowd, they have police and they have a fencing up. And I got there and I said, hey, I've got to go in there. The team's coming in. And this policeman says, hey, there's 10,000 people behind you. They all have to go in there too, pal. Who are you? And I said, well, no, you don't understand. I was the kicker. And he looked at me, and one guy recognized me, and they lifted me over the gate. And so I met the team. So that was kind of a special moment. So most of the special moments, though, like I said, the most important moment were things with teammates, like the one I told you about Payton. When Ditka first came in, I got cut by him twice. The first time he came in, I went to Detroit when their kicker walked out of camp, and the first game was the Bears against Detroit. I got a game ball for that. And after the game, it was Payton again. He came to the tunnel and gave me a hug. So most of the things are player related. But as far as kicks go, that one in New York was pretty special.
Those are amazing stories. You talk about getting cut twice by Ditka.
Yes.
It doesn't feel good being cut, I'm sure, and you've had that happen multiple times. How did you deal with that?
I can't say they weren't difficult. Again, prayer helped. Having a great wife, my wife Maggie, and then eventually my first son was born in 1981. Eventually having kids too put things into perspective. I was fortunate in that it didn't take long to get picked up by another team. As I said, in 82, when Ditka came in, they kept a guy by the name of Rivetto. I got cut. Eddie Murray walked out of camp in Detroit. I went into Detroit. Then there was the strike season. And then Rivetto had a tough time. Ditka cut him and brought me back, and I spent another 2 years there, so it wasn't very long. And then when I didn't have a long time to think about it in 85 because I played in 85 with the Chargers. And then in 86, I made the team with New York Giants and tore up my ankle right before the first game, went on injured reserve, And they went to the Super Bowl and won in '86. So I guess the Lord didn't want me to have a Super Bowl ring.
It is an interesting journey, and you played for so long, which is one of the amazing things. But on the flip side, most people would think that after the Bears, you'd be done. And the Bears was only the start of your journey, and all these other teams as well. I say the Bears just knowing it was a long time, but football was only part of your journey. At some point, you, as a judge, joined the Illinois Supreme Court. And I would not naturally think an athlete would end up on the Illinois Supreme Court. How did that happen?
Yeah, that is an interesting story. I'd be interviewed. For 3 years, I played for the Bears before I went to law school. My brother also went to Notre Dame, and when he got out, he was 3 years behind me. He went to Loyola Law School, and he told me the dean of the law school at the time wanted to have breakfast with me to talk about something. The dean of Loyola used to be a professor at Notre Dame, so he knew my career. So I had breakfast with him, and he said, I keep reading about the fact you're going to go to law school. I said, yeah, maybe this off season. He goes, no, maybe this season. So I went and asked Jim Finks, the general manager, and he said, I typically would say no, but I think a kicker needs more to think about than just his last kick. So he said yes, and I went to law school at night during the season and full-time days during the off season. So it took 4 years. I was technically a day student because most of my hours were during the day, but it took 4 years. And then I got out and I practiced while I played football and then practiced during the off season. And then in '86, kind of practiced full time, went to this law firm in Wheaton and told them I wanted to be a judge. And I ran for the circuit judge in 1988. And there were like 80-some thousand ballots cast. I won by 271 votes.
Oh, wow.
So then 6 years later, I ran for the appellate court, and that wasn't a close election. Ran against a Kane County judge and won with a significant margin. And then again in 2000, I ran for the Supreme Court and against two other judges. And in the three-way race, again, I don't think it would be considered close. I think I won by 12 percentage points in a three-way race. And so I spent from 2000 to 2020 on the Supreme Court and was Chief Justice from 05 to 08.
Wow. I think everyone has first heard of the U.S. Supreme Court, and then hearing about the Illinois Supreme Court. What are the biggest differences, just to explain for our users?
Well, there's some similarities in that you ostensibly are getting the biggest cases in the state. You're obviously where their decisions impact the country, our decisions impact the state. And they're dealing typically with federal questions, and we're typically dealing with state questions. So there's some differences there. The practical differences are that federal judges serve for life, where state judges, you could say we almost do have like 10-year terms, and then it's a retention where 60% of the voters would have to vote to keep you in. So you have decisions, like, for example, as far as somebody filing a lawsuit, everybody has a right to file a lawsuit. You get your trial if it goes that far. Appeals, you have a right to an appeal. But just like the U.S. Supreme Court, the Illinois Supreme Court, most of the cases, we decided whether we wanted to take them or not. You had to take constitutional questions, and a few other areas you had to take the case. But most of the time, the 7 justices are looking at the cases, and 4 of them have to decide to take the case. And then, as I said, the biggest similarity is you're shaping the law of the state, and they're shaping the law of the country.
It feels like a lot of pressure to be shaping the laws that are going to affect millions of people. When you think through leadership and servant leadership as both a judge and as a Supreme Court justice, how do you see servant leadership play out?
Right. When you sit there in the trial court, you see the people in front of you, right? You hear the witnesses, you look to the side, and there are the jurors. You see the emotions of the people and the impact that it makes on their lives. And I think that has to carry over regardless of the fact of whether you're seeing the people or not, right? So when you get to the courts of review, the appellate court, the Supreme Court, you have to really think about how there are names, or there are faces behind the names. There is that same emotion, there is the same impact on their lives, maybe more so because, at least at the Supreme Court, very rarely will it go to the U.S. Supreme Court, so you are the end of the day. So I think servant leadership comes in where you have to still realize the impact of your decision and the human side of it. And I think that's what good leaders do. I think good leaders have to come out of themselves a little bit, right? And maybe courts of review are a very good example where you could just be so settled on the pages in front of you and look and forget about the impact, right? And our job, regardless of where we're sitting, is, to apply the law to the facts and to achieve a just result. I think sometimes that's lost on people. And I think good leaders realize the impact they're making on those within their sphere of influence. And bad leaders are inward focused on, what is this doing for me?
When I hear that, I think through, you have seen so many cases, even if you didn't take all of them, so many have come across your desk. Are there any that stand out to you as just really tough cases that you're able to talk about that it was just really hard to deal with, and as a leader you had to step up and make some really hard decisions? Yeah,
not to talk about a specific case, but it's bannered about so much today, right? In political circles. Oh, this is contrary to the rule of law. This is unconstitutional, whatever. Your integrity is tested when you have to apply the law and come out with a result different than you would want, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's when your integrity is tested. So those are the ones that were very difficult cases, because if it was up to Bob Thomas, I'd rather this goes another way. But under the law, and I have to go this particular way. So yeah, those were tough cases. We had things that were very gratifying to me when it wasn't a case, but when I was Chief Justice from 2005 to 2008. There was a parental notification bill that was dormant for 11 years because the Supreme Court, parental notification of abortion. And I don't know that people really should necessarily have looked at it as an abortion issue. Notification to parents, I mean, they have to be notified if their kids are getting an aspirin at school, but in Illinois, and now again in Illinois, parents don't have to be notified if their child's having an abortion. Mm. So when I was Chief Justice, I became aware through different circles that the parental notification bill was on hold, and it had been on hold for 11 years because the Supreme Court had not put in appellate procedures. So, for example, a girl comes and says, I can't tell my dad would beat me or whatever. There had to be some type of appellate procedure if the child did not notify the parent for some reason. Well, the court was mixed, Democrat, Republican, and unanimously, we came up with the procedures and everybody agreed, and it became law. And that was very gratifying to me to see, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, you could look at the issue and come up with something. Now, again, that's gone in Illinois. But when I was there, that was one moment where I thought, the court did the right thing and set aside politics.
It's interesting because you talk about sometimes you had to make decisions that you didn't agree with based on the law. And also in that story, everyone agreed to at least hear the case. How often did it happen that everyone agreed to hear the case and potentially have the same outcome? Or was there still disagreements of how to interpret the law pretty often?
Yeah, they did a study one time. I think the majority of the cases were unanimous. However, there was still the ones that you remember are the ones where there were dissents. And sometimes there's a silent dissent, right? You basically, somebody comes out with an opinion and you say, hey, unless you change that, here's what I'm going to say and write. And no one wants to be embarrassed. So, sometimes there's a silent dissent and it becomes a unanimous opinion that wasn't at first. I still think their majority are unanimous. But again, there's a pretty high percentage where there's disagreement.
Wow. It's interesting because in, let's say, your first career, there was so much pressure from fans and just your teammates and all of that. Your second career, there's so much pressure from the whole state potentially looking at you for decisions. It's almost like you were built to handle pressure. Do you feel the pressure the same as everyone else?
No, I actually have said that before, that and I think it was one of the times I was running, actually, that I've had 80,000 people boo me. I'm not going to be too upset if one attorney turns around and he's disappointed with me, right? So I think that football did impact, how I looked at the judiciary. And I think from the standpoint, something we touched on earlier, and again on servant leadership and whether you're thinking outside of yourself or inwardly, there are judges that think they're special and don't realize that people are holding the door open and laughing at their jokes because they have a robe on, right? It's not that they're so special. And I had been on the front page of the newspaper, the Tribune, for winning and losing games, right? So I think that as a result of that, I had a career that certainly there'd be a lot more public focus on my football career than anything I did in the judiciary. So I think from that standpoint, it really helped not to take the job seriously, but not take yourself too seriously.
As people think through, you had this great first career, this great second career. How do you think people should think about different stages of their life and if they're still called to do the same thing or if they should think about doing something totally different like you?
Yeah, Again, we touched upon this. I mean, I handle it with prayer. I mean, I don't know that at least somebody in my personality type is cut out for total retirement. I've practiced law now, and I kid around and say I want to find out what I'm going to do when I grow up. And so I think about, all right, Lord, if you have something else for me where at this stage of life, you don't want to spend as much time and travel and effort that you did earlier in life. But if there's a place where he would have me where I could use some of the past experiences of my life, and I've done quite a bit of speaking as well and plan to do some of that. But yeah, I think certain personalities, I'm just not the type to, play golf 6 times a week and go home.
Yeah. As where you are now today, you clearly watch football.
Yes.
Are you as into it as you were then, just in a totally different way? Is it hands off? How do you watch a football game?
Boy, I'm laughing because I had vowed never to go to a Super Bowl unless I was in it. And one time I did go to a Super Bowl game with my wife and another couple. And my wife said, "Where are you going?" This was like halftime. I said, "Well, I'm going to the bathroom." She goes, "It's halftime." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's why I'm going now. I wanted to see the game." She goes, "You obviously," she said, you're used to locker rooms with your own bathrooms. And she said, "It's not how it is. You're going to go out there. There's like 50,000 people going to the bathroom." So I didn't make a terrific fan, at least early on when I played. We do have season tickets to Notre Dame. So we're really into the Notre Dame games. Certainly I also still follow the Bears. Was at Virginia McCaskey's wake yesterday, and what a great lady, 102 years old. I had the opportunity to give my condolences to George and to Pat and to Brian, the sons, and the daughters as well, but I knew the sons that were there. So the Bears, that's still a big part of my life after having spent 10 years there, so I watch them. But as I said, you can only go to so many things, so we're at Notre Dame games every Saturday.
Do you focus more on the game itself or focus a lot on the kickers?
Yeah, both. It's funny you'd ask that because at Notre Dame, we have seats right behind the Notre Dame bench. But the irony is that the kicking net is there. It's a first world problem, Chris, because when they're on the 20-yard line, that kicking net is in the way. I mean, when you stand up, it's not, but we're in the first row. So, I even asked some people, I said, I know kicking nets. I mean, they're going to go up 3 times a game. Can they put it down until they have to use it? But yeah, I focus on the kickers. I watch them where probably others don't when they come out before the game and at halftime. Our seats have been very interesting because to watch the dynamic of the coaching and different players, because we're right, like I said, right behind the bench is a lot of fun, kind of the game within the game. But I think I'm pretty much a student of the whole game and enjoy it. But yeah, kickers are still, and kickers today, I mean, they're just awesome. I mean, I don't know what they're feeding them, but they're the best they've ever been.
Wow. Same thing on the judge side. How close do you follow different bills that are getting put in front of court? I'll
look at cases. I've become more of a casual observer than obviously when I was there and had to look at everything. I'll look at cases if they may affect a case that I've worked on or work on as a consultant or that type of thing. I do get calls from people though. I got one yesterday, on a bill that was going forward and somebody had an issue with it. So I think and obviously I wasn't in the legislature, right? We determined oftentimes whether there was a constitutional problem or not. I don't have much say over whether they pass them or not, but yeah, occasionally I'll get asked to take a look at something.
Do you have kickers calling you as well for tips all the time?
No, but again, back to Notre Dame, the special teams coach actually had a camp. I wasn't able to attend, but had a camp where he invited high school kickers to a kicking camp and had the Notre Dame kickers there, but also had Notre Dame kickers and punters from the past as counselors. Wow. So I guess there's still some value. For a short period of time, some years ago now, I was a kicking coach at Wheaton College.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was good because when I played, for 12 years, they only keep one kicker. So there really weren't many kickers that I liked, that I competed against. So it helped me to like other kickers, even though I was their coach rather than competing against them.
But what a privilege to be able to have you as their coach, one of the all-time greats. That's just amazing.
That's nice of you to say.
I want to ask you 10 rapid-fire questions where you just say the first thing that comes to mind. There's no right or wrong.
Okay.
Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
John Sullivan. You don't even know the guy.
No, who is that? I have to ask that too now.
Yeah. He's passed away. He was a dentist that ran a church in South Holland. The church is still there. He started this ministry, Restoration Ministries, that they decided to take the city of Harvey for God. And they would go and minister to drug addicts, and eventually a number of these drug addicts would come to church, and they had like a place called Harvey House where they would learn the gospel and go into their own neighborhoods and evangelize. They started boxing clubs. Until the day he died, he was involved in that. And so that was the first name that came to my mind, John Sullivan.
That's fascinating. All right, 5 words that most describe you.
I think humorous, emotional, loving, this is hyphenated, family-oriented, and still learning.
Great. Favorite author or book?
Well, the favorite book is the Bible, for sure. Favorite author? Boy, that's good. Because I've read him recently and I give this book out a lot, I'd say Tim Keller.
Oh, yeah. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Man, I've watched so many. Now I'm watching, because I have more time, I'm watching, there are all these old movies. I'm trying to think. We'll have to come back to that one.
I was half expecting that Mark Wahlberg Philadelphia Eagles kicker movie. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, there's a movie where he becomes a kicker. I thought you might say that.
Yeah.
All right, favorite food?
Just about anything Italian.
Okay. Favorite thing to do in your free time?
Free time. I do like to golf and be with my wife.
Okay. What's a surprising fact about you?
Surprising fact that I'm first generation Italian, right? With the name Thomas.
Yeah, that is surprising.
Yeah.
Where's your favorite place you've been?
Positano, Italy. Right off the heels of that. Yeah.
Where's somewhere you want to go that you have not been?
Paris.
And finally, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Trust in the Lord.
Great advice. Well, thank you for being on the podcast and letting people hear some of your story and sharing some of your wisdom with our audience.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's been great. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.